All right, is this thing on? Yeah, I guess it is. What's going on, everybody? It's me, Rich. I'm back with a new episode of Behind the Counter, BTC 2.0, and I just want to say thank you for tuning in last week. I really appreciate the support again. Last week we had on Chris Condon. This week we're going to have on Adam Gorham. But first, let's talk comics. The East Coast got hit by a giant blizzard this week, but I'm a maniac, and I still made it out to my comic store on Wednesday. It was a stacked week, which it usually is. I'm not complaining about that. But again, another thanks to Best Comics for hooking it up. You can check them out at bestcomics.com. Fun store in Long Island, New York, and they can satisfy all your comic book needs. And if they don't have something, they can just order it for you. So I've been getting a lot of questions lately on social media. And a lot of those questions pretty much revolve around, hey, I'm an adult. I have kids who are teenagers, young adults. I'm trying to get into comics. I don't really want to do the mainstream stuff. So what do I do? What's a good jumping on point? That could be a loaded question depending on what exactly you want your kids reading or allow them to read. I know for a fact that a few parents out there it's My Little Pony all the way. They don't want their kids exposed to the Incredible Hulk going on a rampage or stuff like that, which is fine. You definitely need to, if you have kids, make sure you know what they're reading. I think that's a big part of being a parent. I remember when I was a kid, I've always been into comic books. So I used to read my brother's older comics. My brother's a bit older than me. But my mom would still kind of like QC the stack that I'd be reading, just in case. You never know. Off the top of my head, though, I want to say if you're looking for comics for young adults, your best bet would be Boom. Boom Studios has so many great books that are for all ages. Right off the top of my head, you have Folklords, which is a pretty fantastic fantasy story set in a sort of mystical realm with ties to reality, but you may find out that those roles are kind of reversed. It's a very good book that came out within the last couple of years. Spectre and Spectres, which just dropped this week, actually. Fantastic books for the young adults. It's about paranormal detectives kind of being trapped in a house in a town. Cool stuff. Something is Killing the Children. Also another huge pick of mine. It's kind of like Stephen King on acid, but that may be the one you have to QC for your kids. I think that I could recommend that to like a young adult teen, and they'd be happy reading it, And Wind from James Tynion also. Once and Future, another great book from Kieran Gillen and Tamara Bonvillain, Dan Morta, I think. Dan Mora. That's how you say it. Once in the Future is a new spin on Arthurian legend, kind of in the modern day, so it pulls a lot from mythology. It's a fun book. It could be violent at times, but I kind of consider it like an all ages book, maybe if your kid's over 10 years old. Die from Image. We're going to bounce back into another Kieran Gillen book. Lots of coming of age themes kind of set in a fictionalized Dungeons and Dragons world. I'm a fan of this book, but if I was 15, I'd probably really, really, really be into the entirety of the book, the lore, the tabletop game that Kieran Gillen developed for it too. That being said, listen, I'm not an authority on what your kids should and shouldn't read, but I have been getting that question a lot as far as kind of discovering something new and opening up your kids' eyes to comic books, which are awesome. Comics are for everybody, right? Moving on. Do you guys think that we're going to get that Magneto cameo in Wanda Vision? I feel like it's been teased enough to this point, and then before the release of the show, I mentioned to several of my friends and fellow podcasters that it would be cool if you heard a knock on the door or the doorbell ringing, and then Wanda turns around and goes, "Hey, hang on, I think that's my dad." Door opens up, Michael Fassbender. I got a couple of picks of the week before we jump into our interview. I think I started doing a lot of indie books at the top of my stack this week. Usually it's kind of like a mix of the big two, and then it kind of trickles from there. But this week I was in the mood to just start with the indie books. Even though Future State is still going strong, I'm really digging it. I said that last week. I'll probably still say it. I like that it seems like it's limited, and we're gonna get all the books we need within the next like month and a half. I believe it's over at the end of March. My boom pick of the week is Luna from Maria Lovett. Solid first issue that really sucks you in. It was a very interesting number one, and I always like number ones that don't give you too much, but those last 2 pages are really all you need to know going forward. If you like Maria Lovett's work, check out Loveless also. My other pick of the week is Maniac in New York from Aftershock. I'm definitely hooked. This comes out from Elliot Kalin, Andrea Moody, and Taylor Esposito. Aftershock does a really nice job with their horror comics, and they're all pretty solid. You can tell there's a lot of love and craft going into their production line. Maniac in New York is exactly what you think it is. It's a murder homicide mystery taking place on the streets of New York. I feel like the tone that's established in this book is also pretty fantastic. It really, by the middle of the issue, you're drawn in and you kind of want to see this mystery unfold. This would also make an awesome B movie, kind of like a Maniac Cop or a Chud. I can just see that unfolding, but not in a bad way, in the best way possible. So this week, Adam Gorham stopped by to chat his work and art. We have a pretty cool conversation. Really nice guy. I suggest that you follow him, find his stuff, give him his due, and let's try to get him on a DC book, huh? All right, guys, we're here today with artist Adam Gorham. Adam, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on and chat about your work and comics and all that good stuff. Looking at your credentials, like who haven't you drawn for?
Who haven't I drawn?
Yeah.
DC is the one holdout.
Okay. But looking at like all your stuff, I'm like, oh, this dude's drawn everything for like everybody,
Yeah, I've gotten around.
Yeah. How long have you been a comic book artist?
I started working in comics in 2008. I started out on the indie scene here in Toronto and started doing mainstream work around 2000, I want to say 2012, 2013, 2014, that area.
Okay, cool. And then you started, before that, I'm sure, did you go to school for art, sequential art, or was it just always like art. Comics?
When I was coming up, I received formal training for art fundamentals at Sheridan College, which is a pretty prestigious college for the arts here in Ontario. And they have some really excellent programs for illustration and animation, and a lot of their students go on to work at Disney, Pixar, and places like that. But there weren't any accredited schools offering programs that led people into comics. And so I always wanted to get into illustration, but I knew illustration students who were in the 4-year program that would tell me, like, if you want to do comics, you just have to draw comics. And of course, formal training always, it beefs up your skill set and you learn a lot of stuff. But in terms of a gateway into the world of the comics industry, you didn't really need a BA or anything like that to gain entry. So I did a year of art fundamentals. I'm also a terrible student, so I went as far as I could with being a student.
Right.
And then it wasn't really until a few years later that I had been working full time at various jobs that I decided to give comics an in earnest effort. And I wound up taking a workshop here in Toronto run by Ty Templeton, famous for drawing the Batman Animated Adventures comic, Stig's Inferno, big time. And so he was running a workshop in Toronto teaching people just all of the, not just the fundamentals of drawing, of sequential storytelling, but also, giving insight as to how the industry worked. So I was lucky enough to be working on my own comics while taking this course. So I was directly applying everything that I was learning, in many cases in the same night. And so I was able to get, kind of hit the ground running with making comics. And Toronto also has a really excellent scene. So, it wasn't difficult to make something and then basically take it to a local show and be in touch with some of the leading professionals in the industry who, like they're in the greater Toronto area. So, people coming up in the comics world in Toronto, I've always been very lucky with being more or less neighbors with people like, Ramon Perez, Marcus Toe, Scott Hepburn, Ryan North. I mean, like the list goes on. So, I was lucky in just, living where I do, as well as, having some education.
So you took advantage of the community that you were surrounded by in order to get critiques on your work and in order to start working.
Precisely. Yeah. And so, like having opportunities come to me through community and, building friendships. Like my first professional credit was inking my buddy Michael Walsh on an IDW book, X-Files, Ninja Turtles. So, that was my first thing. And, we were members of a sketch group that posted our sketches online in a weekly blog. And we hit it off through there. And then we met at a local show and became buds. And then just kind of, he was a little further along than I was at that point, but we were always kind of like exchanging notes on, what we were learning and what our experiences were. And he gave me an opportunity that really changed my life. Like I maybe would have found my start elsewhere, but that was really my first foot in the door at any publisher.
That's awesome. So up until this point, let's say, like, were you a comic book fan growing up?
Yes.
Okay.
Like growing up, I always loved comic books. I loved storytelling. I loved science fiction and fantasy. And, by the small pond that I lived in, I was a real geek, but it wasn't until I started meeting actual geeks that I realized I feel almost like a tourist compared to people who really live and breathe this stuff.
Yeah.
Because my passion was always to tell stories. And so when I was looking at comics, it was almost as if I was trying to reverse engineer them. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Why is this? I love this drawing. Why do I love it? What about it is great? And how can I do that? And how does what are the story mechanics that make this movie as wonderful as I find it? So, like I didn't have enough money as a kid to be much of a collector. And even when I was, started making money, I had my phase where I was buying, variants of my favorite comics. So
of course,
I'd get them signed and stuff like that. But I just don't have the encyclopedic knowledge that a lot of other fans do. So I've kind of accepted that, like, the things that I love, I don't love them as much as I've seen like real fans love them. And that's okay. But
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I've always loved comic. Like I've always loved the medium, and having a natural ability to draw. It just seemed like a really great place to use that skill and to tell stories.
How did it feel to have that first printed comic in your hand that you worked on?
Really great. The first thing that I ever made, I made with my two hands. I remember there was a summer where I drew like a really short 20-page comic. My sister worked at a Staples Business Depot, so she printed it on long sheets for me that I folded and stapled together.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so I was like, this is great. I'm doing it, and that was like I was in my early teens at that point. And then I really didn't do anything like that again for a long time. But as I say, when around 2008, when I started looking for work in indie comics, I worked on a book called The Vampire Conspiracy, which was a graphic novel adaptation of a low budget horror film. So I hooked up with an independent filmmaker here in Toronto who wanted to adapt his movie, and I spent a year doing that. And when that was finally printed and we took it to a show, it was pretty surreal. I was over the moon about it. And then it's just that same euphoria with every step along the way.
Well, it's the momentum, right? So,
Yeah.
Once you get the one thing, you kind of want to keep it up and keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And just and now, you're doing covers for everybody, right?
Almost everybody. Yeah. I was looking for something and I went on to previews and their website and I searched my name and then it was I forget how many pages of hits came up and I was like, damn, I've been busy.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, when you can kind of search and you're like, oh, I'm looking for the one thing in particular, but then you get back tons of results and you're like, oh man, that's good though. That's like a champagne problem, right?
Yeah.
As they call it. What are some of your comic book influences? You mentioned before that you like to kind of reverse engineer the stuff that you like, which I find pretty fascinating as a process, because instead of just obviously copying something or saying oh, I could do this style, you're kind of going backwards with it, so who are some of the artists that you've really liked that you can do that with and say, hey, I learned something new?
Well, I just on the subject of reverse engineering, I went through, I think, the same measurements of growth that a lot of young artists do, which is I had my tracing paper and went over pages of comics, or I would look, I'd be at my table and I'd have my comic here and I'd be drawing what I saw. And I growing up in the 90s, of course, it was all about the lines, the Lee lines,
right.
So I was influenced by the titans of the 90s that everybody was: Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, McFarlane, I should say. But one of the first books that I was exposed to was drawn by Bernie Wrightson. So the work of Bernie Wrightson had a huge impact on me at a young age. So that his brushy, inky, dark, macabre style is something that stuck with me for a very long time. But I'd go through my phases and I would discover a new artist that just rocked my world, and I would try to emulate them. And then I'm paraphrasing, but I heard an expression once, which is when you try to copy an artist, all you inherit are their flaws. So style is what we end up with when we fail to capture reality. We can only we render reality to the best of our ability, and that's where style comes from. And that's a very individual thing. It's like a signature. It's it's like anything that's specific to you, and it comes from a history of working and muscle memory and how you observe the world and so on and so forth. So, you'll see styles that are similar, but also have their distinct voice. And so anytime that I ever tried, and this is true to this day, anytime I ever tried to be like an artist, I failed at it. It just didn't look right. So I always had to find out, I always had to ask myself, what about a particular artist style that I liked? What about it spoke to me? And why that was, how it worked, how they managed to do it, and then basically run that through the filter that is myself. So Lionel Yu is somebody who, or I've heard it Lionel or Lionel, but I've loved his work for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And Alex Ross was another artist who actually brought me back into comics when I was a teenager.
Okay.
There's quite a few, but I mean, even there's artists that you kind of have to tip your hat to just because they're amazing.
Yeah. I that must have been cool because you had, I want to say it was Immortal Hulk 42.
Yep.
You had a few pages in there, right? And I want to say that was an Alex Ross cover, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. This year, man, or I should say, like, I guess 42 came out this year, but like I drew an issue of Savage Avengers that Lionel did a variant cover for,
Mm-hmm.
and like that blew me away. And I flirted with the idea of maybe trying to buy the original.
Okay.
And then, of course, getting to do a book that had anything to do with Alex Ross it's a pretty amazing feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, that must have been like a cool kind of full circle moment, as you mentioned, him getting you back into comics when you were a teen, and now as an adult, you're like, hey man, we're working on the same book.
Yeah. I met him once at a show in Toronto, and it was Alex Ross being at a show is a big deal, and it was something that like you had to get a ticket for,
Oh
that you
yeah.
had to line up for, and so on and so forth. So I managed to get in and see him, and he signed a few things of mine, and he was signing an edition of Kingdom Come that I have, and I tried to let him know like this book was a huge deal to me, and I forget however it came out. He just was like, "Oh, thank you," and like whatever I said, it probably bordered on creepy than it did complimentary,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
because he was a little taken aback, but yeah, it's definitely a cool feeling.
That's always tough, I think, at conventions when you finally meet the creator. You get those nerves. I think
Yeah,
even if you're still in the industry, meeting I think there's like a set amount of people who you'll always get nervous no matter what. And I always find that fear at conventions where it's like, oh, I look like a dummy. I shouldn't have said that. I don't know what I said,
yep.
Do you miss the convention circuit now?
Yes, I think everybody does. There are aspects of conventions that I don't miss, but I'm at that point now where I do feel wistful about the way things used to be.
Okay.
Um, but when I actually think about, if we could start having conventions again this year, would I go? Probably not.
Mhm.
But I was just talking with a couple of friends this morning about, Emerald City in Seattle and how I miss that show.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, essentially, I really do, but not enough yet to risk anything.
Right. Yeah. I think safely 2022 or maybe at the end of this year you can have something. But it's always like I'll agree with everything you said about conventions that they're awesome, but there's also those couple of factors where you're like, this is not that great.
Yeah,
You don't want. I feel like every single convention I've gone to in my adult life, I've gotten sneezed on at least twice. And and like I'm tall, like I'm about like 6'2", so it's usually somebody sneezing on my elbow. you know what are you working on now, as far as like, is you're doing some stuff for Valiant, right?
no, I was doing some stuff for Valiant when the pandemic hit last year, and so the
Okay.
project I was working on has been put on indefinite hiatus.
Okay.
So I started a substantial amount of work on it, so it was pretty crazy.
Mhm.
Um, and so I right now I'm working on a new series at Vault, which will be, I think, announced fairly soon. We've
Oh,
been teasing
awesome.
it online. So I'm working on that with Christopher Cantwell, who's writing. He's writing Iron Man at the moment. Was writing Doctor Doom at Marvel, and Kurt Michael Russell is coloring it. Phenomenal colorist. He does a lot at Vault, in particular Money Shot, which was a really fun, hilarious comic.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
yeah, so it's our new creator owned from Vault, and I don't want to say too much, but it
Mhm.
revolves. It's about a hero of our own creation on something of an existential odyssey.
Okay.
Uh, I'm getting to draw a lot of really big space stuff, all the types of stuff that I've always wanted to draw. And apart from that, like I'm working on a couple of one-off things, and I just locked down a project that I'll be writing and drawing myself, which probably won't come to pass until 2022. But I writing is a new muscle for me to develop, so I'm
Yeah.
starting.
That's awesome. So Vault, I think Vault, Aftershock, and a couple of the indies in the last year and a half have really come out with some stellar stuff.
Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned that you've always wanted to draw outer space stuff. Can you give us some more details about that? Like some influences? Like, I love hearing about. I'm a big science fiction guy, and I love those classic Kirby space scenes, you know, in comics.
Sure.
And when people do space in comics right, it always looks so good. So, like, what are? Tell me why.
Well, my favorite movie is 2001: A Space Odyssey,
Okay.
and I remember when I finally got around to reading the novels, I was fascinated with the differences between that first film and the first book, which were, I think, more or less made concurrently, um, and and I just thought it would be neat to adapt the novels as a graphic novel. I later learned that Jack Kirby himself already did that. So, you don't want to. That's an act you don't necessarily want to follow. But
kind of tough, right?
but I did have for a short period of time the delusions of grandeur about doing that. But like the notions of humanity continuing its journey and continuing life off planet and going off into the stars. Like, I've always been fascinated by space, extraterrestrials. Like, big X-Files fan growing up, so I would often look at the skies and I can that is that a satellite, or could that be the thing? So like, I've always had a big heart for outer space exploration and adventure. Wally Wood is somebody that I would later discover who also did a lot of like excellent space stuff for EC. And I mean, like, it's just something that I felt a strong connection to. The vastness, the just the size of celestial bodies, and simultaneously feeling insignificant in just comparison, but also connected to all of it. I think it's beautiful stuff. So those are the kinds of things that I would hope to achieve with my art and doing tackling that kinds of subject matter.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. And also, you're a man after my own heart. I can't get enough of the outer space stuff. Like, I eat it up like candy,
Yeah.
Do you watch Ancient Aliens or any of that stuff at all, or no?
Not regularly. I put on Ancient Aliens occasionally when I'm drawing, if I need. I was aware of the meme long before I ever saw the show.
Okay.
But I was in a hotel room once at a con, and I just had the television on while I was finishing commissions. And it was just, I was like, whatever this is, it's incredible. For, you know what I mean? Like, it's just pure entertainment.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's garbage, but it's awesome.
Yeah, like just like popcorn, you know what I mean? So just it fueled every adolescent hope and desire I ever had of about connecting with extraterrestrial life. So
Adam, you've been in the industry for over 10 years, right? What would be a dream project for you, either creator owned or another IP, something that you think you could really sink your teeth into? I know you just mentioned doing a book with Chris Cantwell, which is going to be announced shortly. Like, what have you thought about?
Well, like I have a rather long bucket list.
Okay.
So, like Wolverine is a character who I've wanted to draw properly in their own series.
Okay.
Batman is another one. So those are between the big two, those are my two characters that I would love to have anything to do with.
Okay.
And then apart from that, like there's a lot of creator owned stuff that I'd like to do. And I feel like, I started out doing creator-owned stuff with the Violent at Image, and so that's a story that I started telling again with Ed Brisson in 2020. So I'd like to get back to that at a certain point after I finish, the very full plate that I currently have before me.
Right.
And then like I'd really like to take some time if I can set aside enough, take some time to try and write a story that's a little more personal, and but also, like very project that I can really just sink my whole self into.
Okay.
And but I mean, in terms of, like I mentioned, I alluded earlier that I'm writing and drawing a story for a property that I'm very fond of, so that in itself is very exciting.
Cool.
Yeah. So like I'll take what comes, but I do want to kind of I definitely want to leave a significant mark on the industry within the next 5 years.
That's awesome, man. That's always encouraging to hear somebody talk kind of passionately about their work, as opposed to somebody who's like, I really need to stop doing this. you know. So as far as that Wolverine series, who would your ideal writer be?
It's hard to say. I mean, like if I had, if I had any weight to throw around, I would write it, or at least I would co-write it.
Sure.
But I'm spacing on the name, but like the guy currently writing Wolverine's pretty good. I liked
Benjamin Percy.
Yes, thank you. He's something of a Wolverine himself. He's very strapping in person. He's formidable.
You've heard him talk, right? I'm sure.
I've heard him. I was actually in 2020 at Chicago, the last convention of 2020, first and last. I was at a bar and turned around, and there he was. And he, like, I'm not a tall guy, and we were about the same height, but just kind of, I feel like if he wanted to, he could have thrown me across the room. Like, he just feels like a force. So he seems like a good fit for Wolverine. I liked, I was I think it was the early 2000s. I was reading Frank Thierry's run, which I enjoyed. Mm-hmm. I think that was Return to Weapon X. And Frank's a guy who I like a lot. Chris Claremont obviously had some terrific Wolverine stories. So, I mean, I also have I'd also like to tell a story that kind of explores Wolverine's roots in, like, his Canadiana, what Canada means to Wolverine, or what Wolverine means to Canada. That's a story that I think hasn't been told that I'd very much like to.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. That sounds awesome. I think the beauty of mainstream comics when you get older is when certain writers and artists put their own little personality into them, like a Wolverine story taking place in Canada as to why he loves it and why Canada loves him. That would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think so, and I'd like to do that.
There's two people that think so. I got one more, and this is going to be a new one for the show. I'll edit that part out. This is going to be a new one, and then we'll wrap it up. What is your most favorite sandwich that you've ever had?
Oh, that's a great question. I have had some truly excellent sandwiches in my time, but a couple years ago, I was in England for Thought Bubble, and I took a day trip to York just to kind of hobnob around. And it was getting dark, and I went into this pub, the name of which I can't remember, and it was just basically like a Christmas dinner sandwich. So like sliced turkey, cranberry, lettuce, gravy on this, like the softest roll that I've ever had. I had that with like some chips and a beer, a lager, and it was immaculate. Like, it was honestly, I have dreams about this sandwich. So yeah, I'm really happy. That's a great memory to bring back.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That sounds like an awesome sandwich. One that I feel like I wouldn't particularly get it, but I feel like I would get it and be pleasantly surprised by it.
Yeah. When I went in, I thought I'm going to do like something really English, like fish and chips or whatever the heck. But I made the right call.
Oh, that sounds awesome. All right, great. That worked out well. You could have said, I'm not answering that question, but thank you for the heads up on the sandwich. Adam, I really appreciate you coming on. Where could people find you? Just all your social, like your website. Where can people buy original art if you have original art for sale, etc.?
Absolutely. I'm online on Twitter and Instagram. My handles for both are at Adam T. Gorham. So I'm always posting snippets of new art and making announcements on both of those platforms. I sell prints and the odd sketch on my Big Cartel site, adamgorham.bigcartel.com. I currently have a Godzilla print and a Xenomorph print that I've drawn and colored available for purchase. And then for commissions and original art, you can go to inkyknuckles.com or contact my rep Cam at inkyknuckles.com for all inquiries regarding commissions and original art. And I think that about sums it up.
That's awesome, Adam. Thank you very much again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, man. All right. That was a fun interview. Adam, thank you so much for coming on. Please check out his work and follow him. I guarantee you within the next 10 years, he's going to blow up to that next level of comic book art. His stuff just keeps getting better and better. And listen, he's a nice guy. You want to talk to nice creators, right? And you want nice creators making your stuff. I think the age of the bitter creator is on the downspin. Is the downward? Is on the downward? Is that how you say it? I'm unfamiliar with human words and phrases on occasion. Thanks for tuning in, guys. That was your new episode of Behind the Counter. We'll be back again next week with another interview, some more comic news, and some more ranting and ravings of comic book stuff that I love and I know you guys love. You can find me at BTC Rich on Twitter, BTC Rich X on Instagram, and you can find this at BTC Rich X on YouTube. Please subscribe, smush that like button, drop kick that like button, smash that like button, however you get your kicks. See you guys soon.